welcome to another episode of the CEO Peak. I am Dave Osh, the CEO of Varlinks that sponsors this show. We partner with executive teams to transform the invisible drives that inhibit business performance in high complexity. Our purpose is to evolve leadership effectiveness so that together we create a ripple effect of unity in the world. The CEO Peak Show is devoted to sharing the thought leadership of successful leaders of mid-sized companies and organizations. Such a leader is our guest today, Carmela Castellano-Garcia, the president and CEO of California Primary Care Association, or CPCA, the founder of the Latino Coalition for a Healthy California, healthcare advocate, minority activist, and graduate of Yale Law School. As the CEO of CPCA, for the past 20 years, Carmela has overseen the nation's largest primary care association, representing more than 1,370 nonprofit community health centers throughout the state of California. These community clinics and health centers serve more than 6 million patients each year. Hello, Carmela, and welcome to the show.
Hello.
It's so good to have you on the show, and we have so much fun a few moments ago that we found out that you are actually a rock star. So share with the audience what we spoke about being a dancer and in a band.
Well, you started by asking me for a fun fact, and I told you that for the past years, I have been a member of my husband's band. It's called Cubo, and it's a Chicano oldies band that performs throughout the Sacramento region and Bay Area.
This is so cool. And I really want to actually share the fun with you, one of your performances before. Today is going to be my first performance with a band. The first rehearsal, our first performance, it will be in May. So it's funny that we just found out just a minute before we started this show that the common passion that we have to have fun too.
Absolutely.
And I am so excited to have you on the show because, I want to start with an issue that I personally struggle with the most. How to bring together being healthcare advocate, minority activist, CEO, and a thought leader. I just shared a moment ago in the introduction our why to create a ripple effect of unity in the world. But how do you combine it with a day-to-day running organization?
I think a part of the whole reason the California Primary Care Association really exists is about unifying diverse constituencies in the state of California. Our community health centers are throughout the state. They are in rural, very isolated frontier areas of California to the most densely populated urban areas of the state, serving very diverse populations throughout California. So really, the whole mission and purpose of the California Primary Care Association is about unifying those diverse interests in a common agenda, which ultimately is about healthcare access for all.
Beautiful. So this is how you bring it together, so unifying, right?
That is the mission and purpose of California Primary Care Association, yes.
We had a conversation a few weeks back, and you talked a lot about building the next generation leaders. So how do you do that?
That is a very important priority for me. Being in healthcare and just writ large, it's so critical that we really look to the next generation of leaders. And someone who's been running my own organization for 23 years, it's really important that we think about future leaders. So there's a number of strategies that I've undertaken at CPCA over the last 23 years, really, that have been targeted at how do we build that next generation. So one way that I've really tried to focus on doing that is to build an organizational culture that is about growing our own and developing our leaders from within. So from the beginning, developing career pathways and mechanisms for people to move up within the organization so that we can retain them over time as they grow their skills. But I think a real critical way that I focused on the last generation, which was an initiative that I undertook over about the last 5 years, was really looking at the top echelon of CPCA, the C-suite, if you will, and really thinking about what was the best way to build up that C-suite and recognizing that building from within was really going to be the way to go. And looking at our leaders within the organization and really focusing on internal leadership development to help the next generation really build the skill set that they would need for the C-suite. And we ultimately accomplished that when over a year ago, we promoted in one fell swoop 4 women to the vice president suite of CPCA, all at the same time. And we had spent a number of years investing in their growth and leadership development to really get them to this level and to be able to put them in this very critical leadership position. So I think commitment to the next generation internally for me at CPCA has really meant focusing on creating career pathways, career development, and promoting our own employees within CPCA.
Yeah. And in this way, you design the diversity in the company. You give more opportunities from within, right? You don't depend just on outside resources and so on.
Well, and actually creating diversity within the company was really a targeted and focused initiative. A number of years ago, I'd say about 9 years ago, I noticed as a CEO, I wasn't hiring anybody in the organization anymore, but I meet every individual that comes into CPCA. And I really started noticing really a lack of diversity in the talent that we were bringing in. And I brought it to the attention within the organization. And ultimately, it was our board adoption of a diversity policy that really was a turning point in our own diversity journey. And having a diversity policy in place and then ultimately operationalizing that policy very intentionally over time has actually led to a more diverse staff at CPCA. And it's really been a very exciting and tremendous transformation. And that has also been part of the strategy for developing the next generation of leaders.
And I got very curious about these next generation leaders. How are they different from the previous generation, like my generation? What is different in this next generation leaders than the previous generation?
Well, they were raised differently, and they really come in with a different set of expectations. And I think based on those expectations, it's really important that we create a work environment that really caters them to a certain extent. So, with everything from making sure the technology, their expectation is how technology is used and advanced in the workplace. And we have to make sure that we're up to speed and advancing in those areas. In terms of recognition, this generation really does expect to be recognized and acknowledged for the work they do. And it's important that we have mechanisms to do that. Those career pathways are so important to this generation because if they don't see opportunities to move up, they will move on. They can be more restless and tend not to stay in place in organizations as long. So you have to have strategies to retain them and show them that there are opportunities for them to move up within your organization. So there's just a number of strategies that we have undertaken very intentionally, I would say about over the last decade, to try to address the differences in the generation.
So how do we overcome the fact that actually the existing generation teaches, mentor the next generation, that we won't actually drive them to where we think is the right leadership?
Well, one thing that I think is really critical with this next generation is they are independent, creative thinkers in their own right. And so I think it's so critical that those in our generation who have been doing this for a long time, we have to be open to new ways of doing things. And the new generations have their own ideas. And I think we need to find ways to empower their voices within our organizations. And I think that is how we become stronger, because those of us who've been doing this for a long time, we have a lot to learn too. And I think there are things that we can also learn from the new generation by allowing their voice to come to the forefront and really exploring their ideas as well.
So I want to ask about, you mentioned that you promoted a few female to leadership position in the C-suite. So your point of view about, and as a CEO, female CEO, what is your view about female leaders? And do they have different challenges? And what do you recommend to other females that want to scale the corporate ladder?
Well, there's so much to say on this front. Certainly, I certainly have found it a tremendous privilege and such a great opportunity to be a woman leader in the nonprofit sector, and in fact, a woman of color running an association in Sacramento has been really an incredible experience. And one of the things that I've learned, having been in a leadership role for most of my career, is really the importance of the C-suite and the importance of being in a decision-making role and being not only responsible for the decisions, but also certainly the allocation of resources and the key strategies for going forward. These are very critical positions. And so for me, one of the things that I have always encouraged younger women is to think about a leadership position early on in their career, to plan ahead, to think bold, to think big early on, just like we do often like for our education and plan ahead for the college we might want to go to and spend years planning that. The same with our careers, where very early on an intention to be in a leadership role. And that's why I really do encourage that with our young women, because oftentimes we aren't encouraged in that way. And so certainly myself as a CEO, I think I'm in a very good position to really set an example and help women see what is possible. So certainly encouraging the next generation to think about the C-suite and women to do so is so critical. Another piece, certainly that I see within my own organization and really try to encourage is people really taking charge of their own career trajectory, really, and really trying to find opportunities within an organization to shine or take on a new role. And I think CPCA has become that kind of organization where people could take advantage of openings and new opportunities and excel in that way. So really encourage people, don't wait. Don't wait around for it to happen to you. You need to be proactive, seek out those opportunities and speak to others about your intentions and desires to learn and grow. So I think what I really like to encourage women to do is take a proactive and bold approach to thinking about their career and have concrete steps. Another very critical step is really the mentors and others that we go to for guidance. I know in my career, it's been so critical, the mentors that I've had, starting with my own mother, who was an executive secretary, and her career was a tremendous mentor to me throughout my career, but also many of the other women CEOs and other professionals that I work with, that I've gone to for advice over the years and counsel, men and women. And so I think that's another very critical piece for women in their careers, to have those leaders that they look up to, that they can go to for career advice as they grow along the way. So I think there's a lot that we need to do to try to take ownership of our career and be really proactive about seeking that leadership role.
So let's dive deeper into the bold leader. What did you mean by take a bold approach to leadership?
Well, once you are a CEO, there's a lot of opportunities for that, because I think part of what expectations of CEOs at some level, are to be bold, to help propel an organization forward. So I think part of being bold, and this goes to when I mentioned having a vision about your career, and when you're CEO of the organization, you have a vision about where you think the organization can go, or where you'd like to see it go. But it's so critical when you have that vision, if you want to take a bold step, as a CEO of an organization, you need to bring your board and your leadership along with you. And that's at the levels of the board, which is on top and responsible for the organization, and certainly the staff as well, because any bold initiative is going to take a team ultimately to implement. So I think that is just one key aspect is, what is your vision? Putting it out there, but making sure that you have process to bring others along, as well as getting further input into that vision to make it even better. So I think there's that boldness is about a level of initiative, a level of confidence that you have in terms of what you want to put out there, but it always also requires getting a broad level of input for what you want to pursue.
And in each of us, and not only females, sometimes struggle, including myself, with being courageous, authentic in my work, to voice and find my own voice. So is it more difficult for women actually to be courageous, authentic, and find this bold place in life and at work?
Well, I just think that society puts certain pressures on that can make that challenging. The same woman who is bold could be deemed and termed overly aggressive, for example, and a male showing the same boldness might not be seen in those terms. So there are some of those stereotypical challenges that a bold female leader could face that we still have in society. And I think those are challenges, but it's certainly not a reason not to be bold. But those could be challenges that we have to overcome when we make a bold move.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. And we need help, as male sometimes because we don't see these behaviors. So the boldness sometimes need to be in the fact that we need to point that we will understand the behaviors that actually may stop some women there not being bold because of our attitude.
Well, I would say that is something that I'm so thankful for the Me Too movement, because I think it's opened our eyes to so many issues well beyond sexual harassment and some of the things that led to the Me Too hashtag. But ultimately, it is really about the oppression and the patriarchy in our society, and really looking at addressing the inequities. So I think that goes to these issues, and there is going to be a lot more awareness, which I think is very welcome for women.
So let's move on to, you mentioned the C-suite and the leadership, and how did you build the organization in terms of explaining who or expressing who you are as an organization? And how do you come out together in the same voice to express this vision or purpose of the organization to so many constituents that you have?
When I became the CEO of CPCA 23 years ago, we were a relatively new organization. We were only 2 years old at the time. So we were new to Sacramento, and it was really an opportunity to make our voice heard and make our presence known. And so the community health centers came together with the mission to address the health inequities of our patients. Ultimately, we were in a unique position in Sacramento at the time, because our patients were largely uninsured, low income, minority, ethnically diverse communities. So we represented a very large constituency of individuals who were not being well served in a lot of ways by our healthcare system. Millions of uninsured. So the community health centers were their safety net and a place where they could get culturally competent care. So we were able to start by, in Sacramento, really making a bold case that community health centers were the safety net for California's millions of uninsured and medically underserved individuals. So this was very unique because while there's other associations in Sacramento, the Hospital Association, the Medical Association, the Clinic Association had a very unique niche. This niche of our patient population that was very much suffering from health disparities. Now, this was 23 years ago. The Pre-Affordable Care Act. So then the Affordable Care Act came along when Obama was elected. And around 2010, there was an opportunity for millions of people to gain coverage. And at that time, community health centers were well established as the healthcare entity for the medically underserved, the uninsured, the Medi-Cal population. And people were asking me, what's going to happen when millions of people, when your patients have access to insurance? Will they still get their care at the community health center? And I was very confident and said, I believe community health centers will be very popular post-ACA because we're located in those medically underserved communities. We're already serving these families. When they have access to Medi-Cal, they'll stay at the health center. And sure enough, that is what happened. Not only did we retain our patients, we grew tremendously. And over half of the millions of people who gained insurance after the Affordable Care Act, over half chose to get their care at a community health center. So I think we had really established ourselves not only in the policy environment as worthy of an investment in the medical home for millions of newly insured Californians, but in the public's eye as well, the public who had that choice and option of where to get their care. And so now with the Biden administration, with their focus on equity and diversity and concern about the disparities, California health centers, again, really have an opportunity to be central to the solution for facing the biggest challenges our healthcare system faces.
Most of our audience are not from profit. They are commercial, for-profit organizations. Now, for me, working with nonprofit and for-profit, I find that when it comes to leadership, there aren't too many differences between the two. So what do you think for our audience who are not from the nonprofit, what they can learn from this industry of the nonprofit?
One interesting thing from a business development standpoint that is so critical within the nonprofit context is diversification of revenue, and bringing in resources is so critical to fueling our growth. And sometimes the options are limiting. There are many nonprofits that really have to rely on philanthropy because there isn't a really clear business proposition to the mission-oriented work of the nonprofit. CPCA, because we represent an industry, we're in a very unique and important position as a nonprofit because our industry is able to purchase services, for example, from the association and also pay dues, which are very significant revenue streams. But that is one challenge of the nonprofit sector, and all businesses have to deal with, is how we drive revenue and how we grow our organizations. And that's always been so key to me. And again, why I push people to look at the C-suite, because that is where the center is for defining where those diverse resources will come from, and then ultimately what you put them to. So we have those same challenges as the for-profit sector in terms of bringing in resources, diversification of resources, and ultimately being able to grow your organization so that you can take on more and do a better job with more resources.
Beautiful. It's the best explanation I ever heard. Yeah, it's like, you see that it's not for profit, but in terms of revenue, the challenges are very similar. Diversify the revenue streams and bring more and be independent. So like if you say that some of the organization become dependent on philanthropy, some other startups and other organizations depend on VC money, venture capital, or others. That's also kind of dependency because they cannot generate or diversify their own revenue. So that was such a beautiful insight. And I love all the previous insights about how women actually promote themselves, being bold. And so anything else before we wrap it up that you want to add, Carmela?
Well, I think it is a very exciting thing about running a nonprofit, especially an advocacy nonprofit. It's really that mix of business and policy that I really enjoy. Because from the business side, I have a $12 million company. It was much under $1 million when I started. And we had to grow it over time in the same, growing your staff, growing your resources, growing your revenue, growing the organization. But then at the same time, we have a mission that really gets at the heart of meeting the needs of people in tremendous need. And so the idea of combining the kind of the social justice heart of who CPCA is with the very critical business background that is so critical to be successful is why I so much enjoy the nonprofit sector and working with the California Primary Care Association.
Yeah. And listening to you and understanding your mission, the organization mission, I find such a beautiful and great synergy between what you bring to the table, the organization and the communities that you serve. And I'm so glad that you're there because of this kind of synergy between the passion to be an activist and also do that at the front line with an organization. So that's really beautiful.
Thank you. Appreciate that.
So, Carmela, I really want to thank you so much for taking the time and being with us today.
Thank you. It was a pleasure.
And thank you for listening and watching the show. And I'm looking forward to see you in the next episode. Bye-bye.